Hi, it's Dom from Clean Page Design, and today I'm going to talk to you about how easy it is to read your website. So I was recently asked by a client to appraise their site, and in looking at it, I noticed something in their blog post particularly. This is not this, by the way, this is something I'm going to come to in a second. In their blog post where they were incredibly wide and the font was incredibly small. So it got me thinking about the norms or the best practices for making your site legible. And that brought me to this Kickpoint blog post, which goes through a few of the best practices for how to make your website readable. Now, you notice this is incredibly narrow, and actually this is a lot narrower for a single column than perhaps I would design. But it touches on some interesting points about how the human eye works, how much we can take in, and how to make your web pages easier to read. And if you think about most things that we read, books, newspapers, such things like that, newspapers use columns a lot. Books, except for textbooks, novels are particularly small in size, meaning that the column that you read is small. So doesn't it make sense that your web page should mirror that? As much as technology is advanced, our eyes and our brains still work in a way, let's say, that means we need to be mindful of how easy things are to read. There's a few things in here which are quite interesting about how many characters should be on a line, for example, and how big the font should be, how much space there should be between each line. Get further down, line height, or leading, as it was probably known in the printing days. And then this formula, line length and font size and line height, makes for comfortable reading. And you can visit a number of character counters on the website, on the internet, that will allow you to copy a sample line from your text, paste it in, and give you a character count. And I'd be interested to know your findings on your websites and whether actually things like that have been taken into account. Another thing we can look at on here, I've got a tool here called What Font, which allows me to see what font's being used in the site. So this is 21, we work in pixels on the web as a rule. There are other units, but pixels are the sort of base unit. So this is 21 point text on 34 point line height, which is 1.5. It's half of that, 10.5, a bit more. So that would seem fairly good. I think when I put one of these lines into the character counter, it came back at about 60 characters on average. So that seems to be pretty good. Now, as luck would have it, somebody has commented on a LinkedIn post on this website for Matthew J. Hill Consulting, which was built by Studio Brand up in Ipswich, which mentioned in the post about it being accessible, about it being, amongst other things, easy to read. And you can see, looking at this, just how big these fonts are and how relatively narrow these columns are, which makes it really easy to read. If we pull out the What Font tool again, we can see that this outfit font here is actually 30 pixels high with 45 pixel height. So that's 30 pixels, that's 1.5 times line height, which is what that previous blog post said was ideal. And although initially it looks massive, when you actually get comfortable with it, it's really, really easy to read all the way down the page. The rest of the site is just like this. This is mjhill.consulting. And it's just really easy to read. So obviously, that idea of character count across the columns, font size, line height, and also contrast, which is something we don't often give much thought to. Sometimes we, as people with normal vision, let's say, assume because we can read it, everyone can read it, but there are tools available that allow you to see how good the contrast is. And there are some colours, particularly I've found orange, where if you use white text on an orange background, it can really impair the readability of the page. But here we've got some really good contrast. We've got black. In fact, let's see what colour that is. That is all the zeros, so that's all black, all white, on a very dark background. So it's really easy to read. By contrast, if we look at this accountancy website, and hopefully I've removed any reference to the company name, and apologies if you recognise this is your website. I'm not picking on you just because it's you. I've just found websites, and without being rude, a lot of accountancy websites are not the best, let's say, but anyway, let's gloss over that. But this is a great example of something where we've got huge long lines of text. Now what happens, as I understand it, is as the eye is tracking across at various points, I mean, this is a little bit easier because there are breaks, but it becomes a point when the eye can almost tail off. So by having columns this wide and text this wide, I think this is 150 something characters all the way across, your eye can start to drift, particularly in fairly large chunks of text. Now, as I say, this at least has some breaks, so your eye is not trying to plow through lines and lines and lines of this text. But I just want to show you how, with a bit of web jiggery pokery, how it would look if we were to make it narrower, make the font size larger. In fact, let's just check this one. This is, it's 16 point on 32, so it's the line height's 2, which is good. The font size isn't too bad, but it could be bigger. The colour seems okay, but what we'll do, we'll make this narrower. We'll change the colour to true black. We'll increase the font size. We'll play with the line height and just see how you feel about how much easier it is to read. So the first thing we'll do is we'll change the width of the column. So that's now 720 pixels across, which is quite narrow, admittedly. And then we'll make sure it sits in the middle. And then we'll make the font size 20 point. Okay, now immediately that's easier to read, isn't it? It's much easier to read. Now, it does look narrow on this page, I'll admit, and it might be if you were to design this from scratch, you might move this text to the left or the right and put some images in there just to balance things out. For blog posts, this might work, this single column idea. So if we just change the colour to black, that's going to work for us. That's now black as opposed to what it was before. There's not a huge amount of difference, but you can notice it becomes slightly stronger when you change it to black. So that's the grey, and that's pure black. The line height, as we said, was 2, which is pretty decent. And there you go. With a few simple changes there that I've done using Chrome's Inspector tool, you can see how much easier that suddenly becomes to read if we flick that back to what it was like before. You can see your eye wants to kind of wander because you've got to get all the way across this text. So it's something worth thinking about when you're designing a website or having a website designed for you, and when you're appraising what you've been sent by your designer. It's easy when you send text and have that laid out on the page to think, yes, that's the text I sent and that's how it's going to look on the web page. But don't forget, if you are 100% visibly able, it might not pose a problem for you. But you need to be mindful of who else is going to be accessing your website. And it might be, as with the people that have asked me to appraise their site, they deal with people who care for people with dementia. So it might be that the age profile of their clients is older, their eyesight might not be strong. So just bear in mind who you're aiming your site at and how you can make it easier with a few simple tweaks to read for everybody.